and welcome to Get the Table, another Wrestling Roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dudley Boys of WhatCulture here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. So what do you guys want to talk about? No, we are here today to talk about all hell breaking loose in AEW. Yeah. And, Sige, there's a place I want to start here, and I'm genuinely not doing a gimmick, but I've seen this said online, so I'm just going to cover it off straight away. Could this all be a work?
No.
Cool, fair enough.
No, all right, okay, I'm doing a bit, but I will elaborate here, right? The purpose of a worked shoot storyline is exactly the same as a worked fictional storyline, for lack of a better word. It's to make money with a storyline, right? Okay. This makes no sense whatsoever if you look at the past, 3 months, right? The idea that if this is a work, right, my thinking is, well, if it's a work, the idea surely is to have CM Punk turn heel by basically depicting himself as a complete arsehole who is toxic, arrogant, power-hungry, thinks the rules only apply to him, with the idea being that, and I've seen this kind of these thoughts scattered across online, the idea being that he's polluting and corrupting the heart and soul of AEW All Friends Wrestling with his toxic presence, from which it will be saved by MJF and all the elite. The idea is that CM Punk, being his real-life dickhead self, is a work, and he's the heel now. MJF is literally calling himself the devil and has formed now seemingly a 7-man heel stable, right? That is a worse babyface heel dynamic than a Triple H War Games match. It just makes no sense whatsoever for it to be a work. Like, apply some critical thinking and use Occam's razor. It absolutely is not a work. I just don't think it can be stated any clearer than that, because if it was, what you've done is you've created this absolutely ridiculous storyline where it makes no sense. MJF is a devil and has a 7-man heel stable. But what you've also done, and what CM Punk has kind of done, is you've just ruined the last 3 months of everything MJF has tried to do. And again, it makes zero sense whatsoever. What would have happened in that case, if it was a work, is that AEW would have stepped on its own dick. And I popped too when I heard that. Do you know who I got that from? It's a line in Twin Peaks: The Return, actually. But CM Punk used it last night, and I popped mad for it, even though I kind of came out of that presser thinking he's a dick, but he's the most fascinating, best, worst guy in all of wrestling. And that, Wilborn, is what we are here to talk about.
It's just been such a crazy few days. I mean, you must be exhausted. You worked, obviously, the whole Clash of the Castle weekend. We had Tussle Near the Turrets, the shows, all the reporting on it. You come back into work on Sunday night. You do the stream for All Out. And you said so yourself. 10 minutes after All Out's almost forgotten about because of this presser. And then subsequently we have this backstage brawl, all the chaos going on with the Young Bucks and Ace Steel, all this going on. What do you make of it all?
I think it's really sad that people want this to be a work and are verbalizing that as if to not want to be worked. That suggests that when they watch wrestling, they don't want to be worked by something that is a work. So I think it's sad that that was even part of the conversation in the first place, because this is a series of, like, I believe it, a series of just real life events that have spiraled out of control, because it's a series of workplace disputes. And when have they never not existed within workplaces? People forget that, yes, wrestlers will work you all the time on this, they will corner you on that, but fundamentally, this is a lot of very bad workplace disputes that have, unfortunately, as we will get to, escalated to violence as a result of poor mediation, poor moderation of being able to get out your frustrations in more sensible ways. Unfortunately, the worst possible avenues for people to get their frustrations out, national television, where money is at stake, where careers and reputations are on the line, all that sort of thing. This is a powder keg. And if you're old enough to remember, and even if you're not old enough to remember, there's enough documentaries out there to remind you this has happened over and over again. Like, at the highest level, with Vince McMahon, of all people, policing this. This has still gone on, you know, and he was supposed to be the be-all and end-all of his products. It's a shame that it's happened here, but I think it's foolish to think it's anything other than real. CM Punk, this is something that, like, I don't want to justify his behavior, because I'm really struggling to say. I think there's a lot of people at fault here, and that's always the case. There's multiple sides to multiple stories, but a little bit of me here is a little bit like lightning rod creates lightning. News at 11. Like, you do bring CM Punk in, warts and all, bells and whistles of the big comeback and everything's nice and he's bought everybody an ice cream, was never going to be CM Punk forever. And you didn't even need to be a long-standing fan to know that. You only need to have been watching as recent as 2014 or been watching the wrestling news from about 2018, 2019, whenever the stuff with Scott Colton came up, you know? So it's just...
Scott Colton. That's how you sounded.
You wanted the worst. Scott Colton's the worst.
The worst.
Like, it's just...
Limp Bizkit, CM Punk.
This is CM Punk. This is part of CM Punk's deal. And it's what makes him so fascinating and what makes him part of the conversation. It's what makes him ultimately as great as he is as a pro wrestler, because he's this guy all day long. So he puts that much care and attention and thought. He's super obsessed when he's locked in. And I think we can all agree for the bulk of his AEW run, he's been super locked in for the betterment of the product. But he's also locked into personal grudges and when he believes is right and righteous indignation and all the other things that we all have different faults, but he's as locked into them as he is like what he's fantastic at, better than many, many others. So this is kind of it's so far away from a work, it's a reality that was lying there dormant all along.
Sid, you wrote an entire book about AEW becoming All Elite, the rise of AEW, available on Amazon right now if you want to go and get it. So, you know, you have a great passion, understandably, for this company. And what I've seen looking at your social media over the last 24 hours is a real concern about this splintering now within AEW. And I mean, we don't want to speculate too much, but there are reports that people may leave the company as a result of everything that went on backstage with Steel, Omega, the Bucks, Punk, obviously all that sort of thing. How are you feeling about it right now? Because this feels like a seismic moment in the history of AEW.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what to think. I'm genuinely conflicted about all of this. Like, ultimately, take me back to February, goddamn 2020.
Yes.
Right?
I don't know if I fancy the next 18 months or so.
No. I'll take that month. It was absolutely seminal wrestling television. Revolution 2020 felt magical. The build was absolutely phenomenal. If there were backstage dramas, you didn't really hear about them. There was a really nice, compact roster that interacted with itself wonderfully, that got premium TV time, and all of these things like will factor into what eventually has become of AEW right now. But what I'm arriving at is that great wrestling, fictional storytelling beats this kind of gossipy drama that's kind of fun for the news cycle. It's great to check your phones on Twitter and all the rest of it, and it's just inherently fascinating gossip and drama and all the rest of it. But honestly, at this point, I'm just ready for it all to be completely left on screen because it was better then, the product, than it is now. And ultimately, like delving into the altercation following the presser, again, at time of recording, this could change. At time of getting the video released, it all might change. And I must reiterate or just outright state, this is just speculation on my part about the dynamics and how complicated everything is. There is a chance, right, that if Steel, if everything is true, worried about, you know, being on record and all the rest of it, if the rumors are true, and you've heard them, that he's bitten and thrown chairs and all the rest of it, if he gets fired, and there's, you know, a good reason why he could be for this, then from AEW's perspective, I'm saying nothing that I don't want to say, that CM Punk could take his side and just say, if he walks, I walk. But then could Kenny Omega, again, if this is all true, be reasonably expected to work alongside Steel if they're not willing to forgive one another? Again, these are conversations and situations we're not privy to. They sound goddamn serious. If there's police and legal action being whispered within the wrestling media, then at this point, there might well be a situation where CM Punk or Kenny Omega decides this is untenable for me, so I can't stick around. I would much rather 1,000,000% watch the next 3 or 4 years of the body of work of CM Punk and Kenny Omega, CM Punk versus Kenny Omega, unfold rather than having like a fun week on Twitter. Like, much rather that. I think we've all had a honeymoon phase. We all like the memes. We all like the jokes. We all like the drama. But a week in the news cycle versus that, I just don't know what to make of it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because we talked about it. It overshadowed the paper. It overshadowed the return of MJF, all of this. And how can you expect that all these people not physically share a locker room, but effectively share a locker room?
So this is humiliating optics-wise for AEW. Regardless of what issues have taken place, it has been allowed to escalate to levels of physical violence. Again, you talk about workplace disputes. that should be dealt with via terrible Toby Flenderson handbook and wins and all that sort of nonsense. It shouldn't be that like people are throwing punches or biting each other. Even within pro wrestling, which has forever existed in a multitude of grey areas just to exist in the first place. WWE has unfortunately gotten away forever with existing in the grey areas, and now it appears that AEW could end up doing the same unless there are consequences to these actions. And again, like, it's hard to speculate on the consequences without being able to know for definite what happened in the actions, and none of us are here to say conclusively this thing happened because we weren't in the room, and reports are still kind of filtering out as we're recording this. But the consequences kind of do have to be dire, if only because in the last few weeks, consequences have been dished out elsewhere. Yeah. Precedents have been set with Eddie Kingston and Sammy Guevara, which is suddenly like hugely important. Like, that was previously this vision of a locker room that was in a bit of disarray. Now it has to be the standard bearer for what happens to somebody, if not everybody. Everybody could be suspended as a result of this. You take everybody away and you hope that cooler heads prevail. And Tony Khan will be tested as an administrator and as a company owner, in terms of how he deals with this. But because wrestling exists in the grey and he got into wrestling in the first place, I feel like, again, I can speculate that there will be something in the back of Tony Khan's mind thinking, I need to figure out a way to get art from these artists. I need to get money out of this in the end. He's seen it done in wrestling on more than one occasion. And again, total speculation on my part, a little bit of him might be wondering, sizing up the reality of long term, as kind of Sidgwick leads to with the Punk Omega thing, long term, can I somehow keep everybody on board and make this work? There was a rah-rah Chris Jericho, everybody settled down talent meeting 2 weeks ago? That has profoundly failed. So they need to go back to the drawing board of how to fix the issues that meeting didn't fix. But this is, I think anyway, I could be wrong, but this is probably outwardly the most conversation that has ever been drummed up about AEW. It's for the ugliest of reasons, unfortunately. But they were still in the process. They're only 3 years old at this point. They're still in the process of building stars that will one day be bigger than Chris Jericho or John Moxley or CM Punk. They're still, in terms of those conversations, Omega and Hangman and the Bucks are still on the verge of breaking through, but not quite there. This story might have done that.
Yeah.
It certainly did for Vince McMahon as the owner of WWE post-Montreal. And of course, those comparisons are there for all the obvious reasons. So beyond the conflict resolution that he has to do, or the big, decisive, precedent-setting moves he has to make, I just think a little bit of him will be thinking, can I resolve this wholly for the good of the actual on-screen side of it as well?
Dynamite is going to be fascinating this week, Sage. As Hamflet mentions there, if suspensions are handed out, you've just lost your newly crowned world champion and your inaugural trios champs as well. But you've got MJF there, Lord knows what's going to happen with Hangman Page going on after this. Where do we go from here?
I don't know where we go from here, truthfully. Realistically, the precedent has been set with Eddie Kingston in terms of the suspensions, but, he's not a bigger star as CM Punk. People want him to be.
And there's the grey area, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a grey area. People desperately want him to be. The amount of times, we're coming up to the second Arthur Ashe Stadium show, and 365 or whatever days later, people are still saying, well, he needs to win a title at Arthur Ashe. That's how over he is. That's how much he's a top star in the minds of fans, but he's not in the mind of Tony Khan. So I've really got no idea what happens next, but they need to do something absolutely massive, because it's not just the very, very significant physical violence that's unfolded that needs to be addressed. That absolutely cannot happen again. It's everything that was said in the presser. What a shame if, of all people, the voice of the voiceless, the guy who completely and utterly spent all of his time in WWE just wanting a microphone to tell a story because he valued the expression of an artist over some hack writer, is the one to limit expression in AEW, because what he's done in that presser, in my opinion, personal subjective opinion, is expose himself as a massive hypocrite. What he's done in that presser is said that he works with effing children, right? Rightly or wrongly, if he thinks that, should he have expressed it? Because what he's done is basically been extremely petulant. He wasn't asked about Scott Colton. His mood wasn't darkened by the mention of Scott Colton. Colt Cabana, what am I doing? But you know what I mean. He's gone out there with an axe to grind, an agenda, and he's just done this all by himself. And what he has done is he's kind of buried a pay-per-view for all his talk of the boys in the locker room and the collective and looking after each other and all the rest of it. No one's talking about that pay-per-view because of what he deliberately, in advance, chose to say. And just to circle back to the start of the podcast, when I said it isn't a work, one of the follies, if the whole thing itself is not a folly, of booking a worked shoot storyline is that it makes everything else seem completely fake. We saw this a million times with Vince Russo, right? It exposes everything else as fake. Within 5 to 10 minutes of CM Punk deciding, you know what, I'm going to play by my own rules and just say what I want to say in very controversial, ultimately brutal fashion, is he's made everything else seem not only completely insignificant, but fake. That MJF stuff, right, in contrast to CM Punk, the real human being, very much appearing like a heel for 10 minutes, it's made the MJF material feel so performed, so theatrical, and ultimately, in contrast, so fake. And it's just bollocks, basically. If you're, I can't speak for anyone, but you've got to be seething if you're in that locker room right now. He's completely... It's a good job that the Acclaimed match was so fantastic. Well done to them. That people were talking about that a great deal. But there are so many matches at All Out 2022 that feel like that took place 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And that happened in the span of 10 minutes. I don't want the expression, the unscripted promos, or anything like that to end in AEW, but it feels like we are at the absolute other end of the extreme to what WWE was in the, well, now and for much of the 21st century.
The ramifications of this are going to explode out of it. Like, ultimately, we're going to see little things, or like there's going to be big picture stuff, potentially like suspensions or firings or changes or who knows what, but then you're going to see a lot of little things like that. And I've been thinking a lot about the scripted promo element of it as well. MJF will be required to go out there, and we believe in the star power of MJF to probably get this back on track.
I certainly do.
But he will now be required to do it within kind of people having a very close eye on what he's going to say because of what's taking place this weekend. I'm not so sure we'll go back to scripted promos, but let's not, again, I'm not trying to like drag CM Punk out of trouble here, and he certainly doesn't need me to do it because he's in enough and he's probably standing up for himself doing it. This did start with a line that Hangman Page believed was fair game to do. That's planted a seed within CM Punk, and we know him to be this man that never really lets go of a grudge. But CM Punk lost his place on his high horse by firing back on television with that challenge a few weeks later. But there's two examples of what happens when the wrestlers are given the freedom of expression, and look where that's got us. The fix isn't to do the complete opposite and micromanage.
Never again.
Never again. But the fix isn't to micromanage every word they say, and we don't want a leaked Dynamite script to look like a leaked Raw one. But suddenly, these wrestlers have created circumstances that would justify it, and not necessarily from Tony Khan, but from Tony Khan fighting and losing with a network executive that doesn't want his product like attached to this sort of like. Again, if this story breaks beyond wrestling, that's suddenly Discovery and Time Warner that are like, what's going on down there? You know, like, again, that's what I'm saying about exploding ramifications. It's nothing now until it's something.
It would be such a shame very quickly if that were to happen because, yes, my understanding is that the writers write their own material, which they absolutely do. And they go to their dance partner, their collaborator, who masquerades as a rival and say, just to make sure, is it all right to say this? But that's not everything. Part of the wonder and the beauty and the magic of professional wrestling is that in the moment when there's like a face-to-face confrontation or whatever, you've agreed to say things, but what if something magic pops in your head? Like the absolute best pattern we ever have in this office is when we're into 10 minutes deep into some absolutely stupid in-joke and then something else happens. Yeah. That only happens when you're in the flow and the rhythm of a conversation.
Yeah. I would say the Eddie, third best Eddie, second best Kingston is a nice example of that from Punk the other week.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So if someone says something, you think, I've got the perfect counter to that we didn't agree upon. Oh, but it would get such a pap that I'm going to say it anyway. I don't want that to ever end, right? But ultimately, it might have to, because look at what 5 minutes of candid conversation that wasn't pre-approved have done to this company. We could be losing the heart and soul or the biggest star. It's just awful. And is this worth 2 good days on Twitter? Absolute bollocks, not for me.
It's going to be fascinating to see where we go from here and all the all-out fallout. So let us know your thoughts on it in the comments section below. Like, share, subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts, and continue the conversation with us on Twitter. It's pretty lively on there, at WhatCulture WWE. Well, actually, you can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
You can follow Michael Sidgwick at
M. Sidgwick.
And you can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE, as I said. But for now, this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dudley Boys. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.